What if the mountain Iran trusted for 40 years was never as safe as everyone believed? And what if breaking it open didn't end the danger but multiplied it? Before we go any further, tap that like button if you want the real story without the noise. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns that actually explain what's happening in the world instead of just showing explosions. And if you know someone who thinks this war is simple, send them this video, because it isn't. For decades, Iran built its entire military identity around one idea: bury it deep enough and nothing above ground can touch it. Satellites can watch the roads, drones can track the trucks, fighter jets can photograph every building on the surface. But none of that matters if the real weapons are sitting hundreds of meters under solid rock. That single belief shaped an entire generation of Iranian military planning. Tunnels were carved into mountains. Chambers were reinforced with layers of concrete and steel. Entrances were built to look like nothing at all, hidden in valleys, disguised behind ridgelines, scattered across regions where nobody would think to look twice. This is the story of what happened when that belief was finally tested. Not in theory, not in a war game, in real strikes with real bombs against real mountains. The headlines made it sound simple. A secret base was found, a bomb broke through, mission accomplished. But the truth sitting underneath that headline is far messier and far more important than a single dramatic strike. The target near Isfahan wasn't just some hidden bunker sitting alone in the desert. It was connected to one of the most significant missile production and assembly complexes Iran has ever built. This complex traces back decades to a time when Iran was still in the early stages of developing its missile program with outside help. Over the years, what started as a modest facility grew into something far more layered, far more protected, and far more central to Iran's entire missile strategy. Underground missile bases became the backbone of that strategy for one simple reason: survival. If the launchers on the surface get destroyed, if the buildings above ground turn to rubble, the missiles stored deep inside the mountain are still there, waiting. That logic matters even more once you understand the scale of what Iran had built. Multiple assessments over the years have described Iran's missile arsenal as one of the largest in the entire Middle East, with some systems capable of reaching well over 1,000 kilometers. That's not just a number on a chart. That range is political weight. It's leverage at the negotiating table. It's the reason neighboring countries plan their defenses around what might come out of those mountains one day. If you're standing on Iran's side of this, those underground sites are insurance. A guarantee that even in the worst-case scenario, the country isn't left defenseless. But if you're standing on the other side, on the side of the United States or Israel, those same tunnels look like something else entirely. They look like a threat waiting to happen, hidden exactly where you can't easily reach it. That's the tension sitting at the heart of this entire conflict. One side spent decades building protection into solid rock. The other side spent years developing the technology, the intelligence, and the firepower to break through it. And when the bombing campaign against Iran intensified, this stopped being a story about missiles. It became a story about endurance, about who could out-hide the other, about whether all that engineering and secrecy could still hold up in an age where satellites circle the planet every few hours and precision weapons can hit a target the size of a doorway. To really understand why this strike near Isfahan became such a big moment, you have to zoom out first. Across 2025 and into 2026, Iran's nuclear and missile infrastructure came under sustained, repeated pressure. Major nuclear sites were hit, missile factories were targeted, launch bases were struck again and again over months, not days. By the time analysts started compiling the numbers in early 2026, one widely cited assessment reported that combined American and Israeli forces had struck 4 major Iranian ballistic missile production facilities, along with dozens of missile launch bases since the war began. That number alone tells you this wasn't a single lucky strike on one hidden mountain. This was a sustained, methodical campaign against an entire military ecosystem, built over years, targeted piece by piece. And yet, here's the part that should make you pause. Blocking a tunnel entrance is not the same thing as destroying what's hidden behind it. Satellite imagery reviewed by CNN later revealed something striking. Out of 69 tunnel entrances that had been hit across 18 underground missile facilities, Iran had already reopened around 50 of them. Sit with that for a second. On one side, you have some of the most advanced aircraft and precision munitions on the planet. On the other side, you have bulldozers, dump trucks, and construction crews with shovels. The strikes were expensive, advanced, precise. The recovery was slow, dirty, and almost primitive by comparison. And it worked anyway. That contrast might be the single most important detail in this whole story. We like to imagine modern warfare as a battle decided by whoever has the smartest technology. But sometimes the real fight looks completely different. One side uses stealth jets, satellite intelligence, and years of planning to shut down an underground network. Then the other side just starts digging, not perfectly, not quickly, not safely, but enough to prove that even a technically successful strike can leave a dangerous amount of capability sitting right there, still buried, still intact. According to experts cited in CNN's reporting, Iran may still be holding on to roughly 1,000 missiles stored inside these underground sites. If that number is even close to accurate, then the real question was never whether a mountain got hit. The real question is whether enough of that buried arsenal survived to keep Iran's deterrent alive and to keep every future negotiation trapped under the shadow of missiles that might still be sitting beneath the rock. So the title of this story is technically true, but it's incomplete. Yes, a hidden base can be found. Yes, an entrance can be blown open. Yes, a mountain can be cracked. But can you turn that single dramatic moment into lasting strategic change? Or do you just create a spectacular explosion while the larger system underneath quietly survives and adapts? That's exactly where Isfahan becomes so important. This isn't just a random point on a map. It sits inside one of the most critical pieces of Iran's entire missile infrastructure. The Isfahan complex has long been described as the country's largest site for missile assembly and production, tied to components, propellant systems, and long-range missile development going back years. So when pressure builds around Isfahan, the stakes go far beyond one local strike. This is a place directly connected to the deeper machinery that keeps Iran's missile power running. And the fact that Iran spent decades building underground protection specifically around this region tells you something important. Iranian planners always believed this place would matter in a future war. They were right, but being right about its importance never guaranteed it would stay safe. The deeper this campaign pushed into missile production and storage, a clear pattern started to emerge. Early strikes focused on the basics, air defenses, communication systems, command centers, the connective tissue that keeps a military functioning. Then the campaign moved further, targeting launch sites and industrial facilities directly. That sequence isn't random. It follows a classic military logic. First, blind your enemy, then cut their coordination, then make it harder for them to rebuild, and eventually force the underground network itself to reveal exactly how much protection it really has. If you're finding this useful, drop a comment telling me one thing you didn't know before this video, and hit subscribe so the next deep dive lands right in your feed. This is also why the images coming out of these underground strikes hit people so hard online. What viewers were watching wasn't just another explosion clip. They were watching a real test of a national strategy that Iran had trusted for decades. Analysts have called it Iran's underground missile city concept. The basic idea is simple. Even if the exact layout of every individual site remains secret, spread your assets out, harden them under rock, give every site multiple entrances so no single strike can seal it completely. Build enough redundancy that even repeated hits can't wipe out the whole system at once. For a long time, that strategy looked like it was working exactly as designed. If your enemy has to waste repeated, expensive strikes just to block a few entrances, and your stockpile survives underground regardless, and you can reopen those entrances later using nothing more than construction equipment, then your buried network is doing precisely what it was built to do. It buys time. It preserves options. It makes every decision your enemy makes more costly, and that cost matters more than people realize. A sustained deep strike campaign depends on precision weapons, stealth aircraft, constant intelligence gathering, and battle management systems, none of which are unlimited or cheap. Iran, on the other hand, can respond to a lot of that pressure with something far simpler. Concrete, terrain, engineering know-how, manual labor, not a solution forever, but often enough to complicate and slow down the entire campaign against it. And this is where the human side of the story really starts to show itself. Behind every satellite photo and every military briefing is something much simpler. Two sides trying to convince each other and themselves that survival is still possible. Iran is trying to prove its hidden arsenal can absorb the punishment and keep functioning. Its opponents are trying to prove that nowhere is truly safe anymore. That's not just military strategy, that's psychological warfare. It's about fear, it's about credibility. It's about the exact moment a country starts wondering whether the systems it trusted for 30 years can still protect it the way it always believed. That question gets even sharper when you look closely at how some of these facilities have been described. Experts cited by CNN noted that certain Iranian underground missile sites sit beneath hundreds of meters of solid rock. That single detail changes everything about what air power can actually accomplish here. Bombing can block access, it can crater roads, it can destroy launchers sitting out in the open, but actually destroying everything buried deep inside that rock is an entirely different level of difficulty. That's exactly why headlines claiming a bomb finally found the mountain can be misleading if you don't slow down and look closer. Finding a target is only step one. After that comes mapping the tunnel network, understanding how different chambers connect, deciding which weapon can actually do the job, choosing whether the goal is total destruction or simply delaying access, and then, after everything, figuring out what actually survived. In war, that last part, what survives, is often the entire story. Now here's the part most people scroll right past. Even when underground missile sites get hit hard, the real strategic meaning of those strikes depends entirely on what happens afterward. Do the launches actually slow down? Do the production lines stop running? Do repair crews lose access for good? Or does the country simply absorb the hit, clear the rubble, reopen the roads, move whatever weapons survived, and keep the underlying threat alive? That question matters because military campaigns get judged way too early, way too often. One dramatic explosion gets clipped into a 15-second video and shared everywhere as proof of total victory. But total victory in a strike campaign like this is incredibly rare. What you usually get instead is partial degradation. You weaken the enemy, you make their operations harder, you buy time, you force them to adapt, but you don't fully erase the threat, no matter how satisfying the footage looks. That appears to be exactly the uncomfortable truth playing out here. One expert quoted by CNN put it in the simplest terms possible. Tactical success does not automatically become strategic success. Keep that sentence in your head because it explains almost everything about how this conflict actually works. A tunnel entrance can be sealed, a launcher can be destroyed, a road can be cratered into uselessness. Those are all real, measurable wins. But if the broader strategy fails to turn those individual wins into a lasting shift in the balance of power, the battlefield result can fade a lot faster than anyone expects. A brilliant strike can still, in the end, not be enough. And it seems Iran had been preparing for exactly this kind of pressure for a very long time. One missile expert told CNN that Iran had essentially been preparing for this type of war for 20 years. That single sentence explains more than most official government statements ever could. It means these underground sites were never built around the fantasy of total invincibility. They were built around the expectation of repeated, sustained attack. Survival never required perfection. It only required resilience. That's exactly why those reopened tunnel entrances matter so much. They prove the system wasn't just built to resist a strike. It was built to recover from one. This also helps explain why missile production facilities became such high-value targets throughout this campaign. By early 2026, reporting described severe damage at several key production sites across the country. Analysts cited in wartime assessments believed that damage had effectively halted Iran's ability to produce short and medium-range ballistic missiles, at least until those facilities could be rebuilt. If that assessment holds up, then this campaign was doing something far more serious than just slowing down current launches. It was targeting the future of Iran's entire arsenal. That distinction matters enormously. Underground stockpiles represent what Iran can still fire right now. Production facilities represent what Iran can replace later. If tunnels get blocked, but production keeps running, the threat eventually comes right back. If production gets damaged, but the underground stockpile survives, the threat continues anyway, at least for a while. But if both get pressured at the same time, you start squeezing not just the present force, but the future force alongside it. That appears to be the deeper logic sitting behind this entire campaign. And yet, there's still a hard limit to how far this pressure can go, because Iran has rebuilt before. Satellite imagery cited by CNN showed that after earlier rounds of strikes, Iran had already repaired several missile-related facilities. According to CNN's reporting, U.S. intelligence assessments indicated Iran had been rebuilding key military capabilities, restarting drone production, and replacing missile launchers and production capacity faster than many analysts had expected. One U.S. official reportedly said Iran had exceeded the intelligence community's own timelines for reconstitution. That detail should grab your attention because it tells you this was never simply a race between bombs and bunkers. It's a race between destruction and rebuilding, between precision strikes and industrial recovery, between what one side can hit and what the other side can restore. And that's a completely different kind of story than the one most viral clips are trying to sell you. The viral version says, hidden mountain exposed, secret base destroyed, case closed. The real version says a hidden network got hit hard, suffered real damage, partially recovered, and remains central to a much larger ongoing struggle over deterrence, repair, production, and leverage. That's the version that actually matters if you want to understand what's really happening here. If this is starting to change how you see this whole conflict, do me one favor, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss where this story goes next. So why are missiles sitting at the center of all of this? The answer isn't only military, it's deeply political. Iran's missile arsenal is one of its most valuable bargaining chips on the world stage. Yes, missiles threaten military targets, but they also threaten shipping routes, regional infrastructure, and the wider balance of power across the Middle East. Even if a large number of them get intercepted in any future conflict, their mere existence changes how negotiations play out. A country walking into talks with a large surviving missile stockpile behaves completely differently from a country whose missile backbone has been shattered. That's why these underground sites matter for reasons that go far beyond the battlefield. They hold more than weapons, they hold leverage, and once you understand that, you understand why any sign that those sites are vulnerable sends a shockwave through the entire region. This was never just about whether a mountain could be physically damaged. It's about whether Iran's long-term deterrent can still be trusted by the very people who spent decades building it. Now try to imagine what this actually feels like from inside the system. Decades of careful engineering, massive amounts of money, painstaking secrecy, mountains chosen specifically for their protection, entrances disguised to blend into the natural terrain, an entire doctrine built around the idea of endurance. And then, despite all of that, repeated strikes come anyway. Roads get shattered, entrances collapse, launchers sitting outside get destroyed one after another. Facilities tied to missile production get hit across the entire country. Slowly, the promise of safety starts to look a lot less certain. Not because the whole underground network vanishes overnight, but because the enemy keeps proving it can come back again and again. That might be the most unsettling part for any leadership under this kind of sustained pressure. It's not one successful strike that breaks confidence. It's repeated successful access. Not proof that the shield is completely useless, but proof that the shield can be worn down over time. And once that realization sets in, every future decision becomes heavier. Do you spread your assets even further? Dig even deeper? Move faster to fire before you lose the option entirely? Try to negotiate sooner from a position that's still strong enough to matter? None of those choices are simple, especially when you know your opponent is watching closely for any sign of weakness. There's another reason this story refuses to stay simple, and it's this. The same war that damages missile infrastructure also damages certainty itself. Every side involved wants to control the story being told. One side highlights the devastating strikes and the damage inflicted. The other highlights survival, recovery, and reopening. One side insists capabilities are being crushed. The other insists key strength remains fully intact. Somewhere between those two competing claims sits the actual truth. And that truth is uncomfortable because damage can be severe without being decisive, and recovery can be real without being complete. That middle ground is exactly where serious analysis has to live, especially when public language gets more dramatic by the day. Words claiming total destruction spread fast online, but the actual evidence keeps pulling us back toward caution. CNN's own reporting showed that Iran reopened a large number of struck tunnel entrances after the fighting slowed down. That alone should warn anyone against confusing a dramatic image with permanent elimination. At the same time, the damage to production sites may have created real, long-term pressure. If missile production really was halted or severely delayed at major facilities, that directly affects how quickly Iran can rebuild its strength going forward. So both things can be true at the exact same time. The underground network may still be dangerous, and the broader missile production system may still be under serious, lasting strain. That dual reality is exactly what makes this such a high-stakes situation. Iran doesn't need perfect survival for its underground strategy to still matter. Its opponents don't need perfect destruction for their campaign to still matter either. Both sides can be partially succeeding at the same time, and that's precisely what makes this region so unstable right now, because partial success on both sides often produces the most dangerous outcome of all. Not peace, not collapse, just prolongation. Each side still believes it has tools left to use. Each side still sees pressure as valuable. Each side still believes time favors them more than it favors the other. There's a diplomatic dimension to all of this too, and it might be the most important one. Missiles were never just battlefield tools for Iran. They sit at the very center of bargaining power, fear, and political survival. If Iran manages to keep a meaningful underground stockpile intact, it still holds something powerful to threaten with, and something valuable to eventually trade away at the negotiating table. But if that stockpile starts looking genuinely exposed, every future negotiation becomes more urgent and far more tense. Leaders might talk about peace publicly, while privately recalculating exactly how much leverage they actually have left. This is where underground bases stop being purely military assets and start becoming something closer to emotional anchors for an entire state. They tell leadership that even if factories get hit, even if cities come under pressure, even if rivals boast loudly about the damage they've caused, there's still a buried reserve that can change the outcome of the future. Take away confidence in that reserve, and you shake something far bigger than logistics. You shake the story a nation tells itself about its own ability to endure, and that kind of shock can cut in two completely different directions. Sometimes a state under this level of pressure becomes more flexible, seeing the rising cost and starting to think seriously about limits. Other times it becomes more dangerous, seeing its room to maneuver shrinking and deciding it has to act before its position gets even worse. That's exactly why outside observers should be careful about celebrating too early. A strike that weakens a hidden missile network can reduce long-term danger, but it can just as easily intensify short-term risk. When a country starts to believe its shield is genuinely cracking, it doesn't always step back quietly. Sometimes it pushes forward instead, trying to prove to everyone watching that it still can. That possibility is part of what makes this entire situation feel so tense right now. Every new crater in the ground can mean two completely opposite things at once. It can mean the buried network is genuinely getting weaker, or it can mean the pressure building toward a dramatic response is getting stronger. And that pressure never stays contained in one place. It spreads outward, toward shipping lanes, toward neighboring states, toward air defense planners across the entire region. In that sense, a mountain near Isfahan isn't really just a mountain anymore. It's become a pressure point inside a much larger regional system. And that's exactly why this story deserves to be read like a warning, not watched like a movie scene. Try for a moment to imagine being the commander responsible for missiles hidden deep inside one of these mountains. You were told your position was hardened enough to endure almost anything. Then entrances start getting buried. Repair crews come under fire. Roads get smashed apart. Satellite images reveal damage in places you once considered completely secure. You might still believe in the system on paper, but belief and confidence stop being the same thing. Now flip the perspective. Imagine being the planner responsible for neutralizing those exact sites. You commit some of the most advanced aircraft and expensive munitions available to suppress an entire underground network. You damage the entrances, you strike the production nodes hard, and then satellite imagery shows bulldozers quietly reopening access within weeks. Every claimed success now has to be tested against time itself. Did you actually solve the problem, or did you only manage to postpone it? That's exactly why this conflict is so difficult to summarize honestly in a single sentence. There are no clean endings here, only shifting balances, only pressure followed by response, only damage followed by repair, followed by more damage. And that's precisely why the strike near Isfahan captured so much attention in the first place. People are hungry for a moment that feels truly decisive. They want to believe the hidden network was finally broken for good, reduced to nothing more than a lesson in failed secrecy. But wars built around hardened underground infrastructure almost never give us endings that clean. Still, the symbolism here matters enormously. When a missile site inside such a critical region gets targeted directly, it sends a message that travels far beyond the blast radius. It tells regional rivals that buried assets aren't as untouchable as they once believed. It tells negotiators that leverage might be shrinking faster than expected. and it tells military planners everywhere that the next real phase of this fight will be measured in the timeline of recovery, not the size of the explosion. That might sound abstract, but it's not. Recovery itself has become a battlefield. If Iran can keep reopening these sites faster than expected, then its underground missile strategy stays alive and relevant. If strikes can keep delaying that access long enough, the doctrine itself starts to crack under the pressure. That's the real scoreboard here. Not one dramatic explosion, not one viral night, not one clip shared a million times. A longer, quieter race that keeps running in the background. And that race matters because missiles shape diplomacy and risk calculations for every state sitting within their range. As long as Iran holds on to a meaningful stockpile and a working ability to restore what it loses, the threat stays real. As long as its key production sites remain damaged, the strain on its system stays real too. That's exactly why a phrase like secret missile base exposed can distract people from what actually matters most here: survivability. Survivability was never something you judge before a war even starts. It gets judged during the war itself, after every impact, throughout every repair, under every repeated wave of attack. That test is happening right now, and the early verdict isn't total triumph, and it isn't total failure either. It's something far more dangerous than both. Iran's underground network appears vulnerable enough to keep getting pressured, but resilient enough to remain relevant despite everything thrown at it. That combination should genuinely worry everyone paying attention, because it means future leaders can look at the exact same evidence and walk away with completely opposite conclusions. One might say, keep striking, the shield is clearly weakening. Another might say, move faster, because enough missiles are still surviving underground right now. And whenever both sides believe urgency favors them, the chances of any real de-escalation get thinner by the day. A base hidden for 40 years is never just concrete and rock. It represents generations of planners, engineers, budgets, fear, and national pride, all buried together underground. When a project like that gets exposed to repeated attack, it challenges a core national assumption at its foundation. That doesn't mean the assumption is dead. It means the mountain no longer speaks with the same certainty it once did. And in a region where certainty has always been the real currency behind deterrence, that shift changes everything that comes next. So where does all of this actually leave us? Here's the clearest way to put it. America didn't simply stumble onto some forgotten cave and erase it in one clean strike. A long-built, deeply layered missile network has been repeatedly attacked over months. Entrances have been buried, roads have been broken apart, key production sites have absorbed severe, lasting damage, and yet, at the same time, Iran has already reopened many of those entrances and repaired much of the damage. This isn't the story of an untouched fortress standing proud and unbothered. But it's also not the story of a threat that's been fully wiped out. It's the story of a hidden system living under real sustained pressure, still dangerous, but no longer completely out of reach. And that might be the most consequential shift in this entire conflict. Once a buried deterrent gets proven to be reachable, every future crisis changes shape around that fact. Military planners quietly update their assumptions. Diplomats start bargaining under a very different shadow than before. Regional governments reassess their own risks, and the very idea of underground protection starts to feel like it buys a little less safety than everyone once believed. That doesn't make this war cleaner. It makes it more unstable than ever. A surviving missile force can still threaten. A damaged but rebuilding production base can still recover given enough time. An incomplete strike campaign can still tempt ambitious leaders to push even further than before. This is exactly why that mountain matters so much. It's a warning about the real limits of air power against hardened underground networks, and about how dangerous the space between damaged and destroyed can truly become. If that mountain had been completely neutralized, the strategic message would have been simple and clear. Instead, what we're left with is a messy middle ground, enough damage to genuinely shake confidence, enough survival to keep the danger alive, and that messy middle is exactly where escalation quietly grows. Maybe that's the one thing worth carrying with you after this video ends. It was never really about a secret base being hidden for decades. It was never really about a bomb finally finding it. The real danger sits in a much narrower, much darker space. The gap between what a country believes it can still endure and what its enemies believe it can no longer survive. That narrow gap is exactly where miscalculation grows roots. That's where pressure slowly turns into panic. That's where leaders on both sides start convincing themselves that just one more strike or one more repair will finally settle the argument for good. History keeps teaching the same lesson over and over again in every conflict like this one. It almost never does.